Welcome everyone. Welcome to Dynamics Futures, the next era of business. I'm Suneet Parikh. I'm the Senior Solution Architect at the RAND Group. Today, I'm going to cover an exciting topic about expense management and Audit Workbench. How do they work together? So let's start our demo. Thank you. With that, I want to just show you on the left side of the screen, there is asset management and expense management. These are the two topics that we will be covering today within Dynamics. So with that, I'm going to explain some key features of Dynamics. When we are in finance and operations within the expense modules, expense management, there are definitely prerequisites to set up some parameters before we can run some rules and compliance out of it. Some of the setups that that can be done are for categories. You can define expense categories like meals, lodging, any of that. You could also create expense report policies. So if you want to enforce hey, you can't spend more than $250 per hotel per night, you could set up policies like that. You could route your expenses through workflows for approvals, management approvals. You can then go and post to general ledger, GL accounts, expense accounts, and also create vendor payments out of it. So for the purpose of this demo, I have configured some expense policies, some advanced expense policies to say generate warning when the expense report, when the hotel category of the expense report exceeds $250. If the receipts are not attached, then a justification is required. And then also enable the number of nights field. So when you stay at a hotel, you can put the whole expense as one line, but then you can specify the number of nights that that the person stayed in. So right. So that's for the expense management, right? As far as the audit workbench goes, you can set up some audit policies, right? So what does that mean? So when you create rules based on document types, for example, expense lines, right? We'll definitely look at it during our presentation, the demo presentation. But just to explain, so expense reports enforces the rules, that stuff. Audit policy detects the compliance of those policies, So you can set up query types where you can aggregate things or detail things and flag some anomalies. You can run audits, that stuff. Also, you can review the results that appear as flagged, meaning they are either meeting the policy or they are not meeting the policy, depending on what policy compliance we have set up in the audit policies, right? You can track that to resolution, so you can go and either put the policy on hold because obviously you have not processed the payment yet for the vendor. So you could then determine if there are duplicate expenses, what resolution do you want to do, that stuff, right? So with that, so you can create aggregate expense lines by employee category, flag anything that doesn't meet the threshold. You can also create audit rules for review and resolution. So how do these two things work together, the audit workbench and expense management? So expense management captures and categorizes spend. Audit workbench, on the other hand, ensures that the spend complies with internal policies and external regulations. Together, they support financial integrity, risk management mitigation, and process transparency. All right, so let's jump right into our demo. So we will generate some basic expense reports, to see whether the expenses meet the expense policies that have been set up. And then we'll come to the audit workbench and review what happened when we process those duplicates. So I'm going to jump into expense management. I'm going to create an expense report. We'll have to run this through the workflow. So we'll create a new expense report. All right. So here we have the basic stuff that we normally fill out. So in here, I'm going to select the hotel expense category called hotel. I'm going to put in a transaction amount of $200 first, so that you see that based on our rules, we don't need to we don't need to enter justification or anything because it's under the threshold of like $250, right? So as you can see, the rules flag that only thing that's required is itemization, right? Which is normal because the hotel needs to be itemized, for the type of expense that it needs to go and post to, right? So with that, we can go and say, I'm going to go to itemize. I'll go to the details view. I'll go and itemize. I will add a category. I will add a hotel daily room rate for $200. Okay. And then you can also see, like, because we had turned on that feature of number of nights, it's nice to have, employees or workers kind of like enter the number of nights they stayed in, right? So if everything is done, we are going to save this. We are going to submit this to workflow and say, please approve. Okay. All right, perfect. So this kind of like went on its way for workflow. So while the workflow is running, I've set the workflow to auto approve. So hopefully, this will run by the time we do like another expense report to see how the other policies kind of like come into play. So I'm going to create a new expense report. This time I'm going to select an expense category of hotel again. I am going to make sure that the transaction is over $250 so that we can go and make sure that we are able to see how this how all this comes into play, right? So it's $275. We are going to now go and kind of like itemize that. Okay, we are going to itemize. We are going to add the category. Again, we are going to pick the category of like daily room rate, and we are going to put in the amount, $275. Okay, number of nights, we are going to say 1. Now, we are not attaching any receipts or anything. If I go to save this, if I try to submit this expense and say, it's going to tell me a justification is required for the missing receipts. So you see my justification tab came on, and then we are going to put in the justification. So I'm going to say just missing receipts as my explanation. I'm going to move out of that field, and now if I go to submit, I should be able to submit this because I entered the justification, right? Okay. All right. So this is the second one that kind of like went on its way. I'm going to create one more kind of like, so that what I want to do is I want to create a duplicate of the same expense report. So somebody, let's say, did a duplication. It was for 10/12. The amount was $275. I'm going to create exactly the same report with the same transaction date, the same amount, the same category. That's when we go to the audit workbench and see what happens, because the expense reports, as long as things are justified, whether a receipt is attached, the number of room nights have been entered, the justification has been entered, the expense report will process. It will not flag a duplicate at that point, right? So let's go and add one more kind of like expense report. Okay. And we are going to enter the same $275. We are going to make this billable. We are going to go to our itemization. We're going to itemize this. Okay, we are going to put in the number of nights. We are going to go to submit this, and that's where it's going to tell us that the receipts must be attached. So in this case, a receipt must be attached, and justification, if there is no receipt, then justification should be entered. So we are going to say again, missing. Okay, so that's what I wanted to display, that because you did not enter the missing receipts, because you did not attach the receipts, that it does flag you for that policy. So let's go and submit this for approval as well. Okay, so now we have 3 expense reports that we have kind of like prepared so far, and we are going to go to all expense reports to see where they stand. So these are the 3, 657, 58 and 59, which we did today. We are going to kind of like go and process them. So this one, and this one, they're all ready to post. So we'll remember this expense report numbers 657, 658 and 659, and then we will go and see the compliance of these reports kind of like in there. I'm just going to select the previous other ones that I had already entered and created as a sample. So they will go on to the audit workbench to show us what do we see as far as duplication and the reporting from the audit workbench. Okay. So it will take a minute to post, and then let's see. Once it's posted, we will move on to the audit workbench part of it. So all these expenses have been posted. Now we are going to switch to our audit workbench. So like on audit workbench, like I said, we set up some audit policies. So let's go and review some audit policies. So here is my expense policy. What I'm trying to detect is like 2 things. I want to detect duplicate expenses. I can also look for some expense keywords. So if it's a conference, if you want to, if we have used those keywords conference, you could kind of run the expense reports that contains the word conference and review like how many of those expense reports have been posted. You can also do some random sample of expenses. So that's where you go and define like what percentage of expense reports do you want to audit, just to go and take a look. So duplication is great. We definitely don't want any duplicate payments to happen. We want to flag all duplicate expenses. So that's what kind of like will be there. But if you look at the random sample expenses, I'm just going to help you review this rule kind of like. The rules are the same way they are set up in like the expense management module area. So you can say the effective dates, kind of like that stuff. You can specify the sampling percentage. So let's say we submitted 10 expense reports, or there were a total of 100 expense reports in a month. Any random 10 expenses will be flagged on the audit workbench for you to review those. That's the percentage. So it depends what your sampling percentage requirement is. You could set that up. You could also then run a test over here and then see like how many kind of like shows up. It asks you for like selection starting date and ending date. Obviously you will see the same results on the audit workbench itself, but you could run the results over here. So for example, if we say from September 1st to today, how many, you can run the test. So it's 10%. So depending on how many expenses we ran during the month, or in the last few days or last month, it will show up like it picked up like 2 expenses, right? So hopefully we submitted 20 expenses, 10% of that would be 2, and it shows the expense report number. It also shows the employee name. If the purpose was entered, it will show whatever information was entered. It will kind of like display over here. As you can see, this is a hyperlink, so this will take you right into the expense report itself. You could open and kind of like review that as well. Okay. So this is one way of setting up the policy and testing whether the policy is working or not before you kind of like turn that on, right? Now, just like any other thing, you also set like the recurrence of running this policy so that you can run that periodically as and when you want that. The good thing about setting up like the compliance part in the audit workbench is you can do this like every few days or every day. That way you're not waiting until the end of the month, right? Or you're not doing this once a month kind of like to make sure that, hey, there were no duplications. Now, we have definitely looked at the expense reports. They all look aligned, even though it was approved by the managers, right? It gives you like authority kind of like to see how the spends are happening. You could also set up like categories, right? So you can go and say, hey, I always want to look at like how much people are spending on meals and entertainment, right? So, anything can be set up kind of like over here. You can kind of like enforce this policy to the company's needs. Okay. So with that said, what I want to now review with you is you can kind of like run this policy because I have set this up in the parameters. I have set, the additional options. The audit policy is that I have put the starting date and the ending date, right? So here's where you specify how long you want to run. If you want to run it wide open, just, specify like a date range that works for you. And then you could set that up in a batch, right? So with batch, obviously, just like any other batch, you define like the cadence, whether you want to run every 15 minutes, do you want to run every 4 hours, do you want to run every Friday, every Saturday, so that it's going to automatically kind of like run that for you, and then have the results kind of like ready on the audit workbench itself. Okay. So that's what this kind of like setup does. So I have set up to run like immediately, so that we can see some results. So we will go in and kind of like look at like what those results are, right? So I'm going to go back into this audit workbench module, and all the things are set up over here. The policies and the rule types, they're all set up. It's required. Case grouping criteria is optional. You could certainly do that if there is a requirement for that. So now I'm going to click this audit cases. So once I click the audit case, right, this is where all the expense reports kind of like came up. So I am going to flip this the other way so that we see the most recent one on the top, right? So there were 2 policies that I set up, one to detect duplicate expenses and one to audit the random sample of expenses, which was like that 10% rule that we had, So it does do that. It does periodically, like how and when the cadence is set, it will run. What you can do is like, so let's start to review the audit duplicate expense, what that results were, right? So once you click into this case ID, it's going to tell you that we were looking for expense hotel category. We were looking for some associations. So it tells us like this expense report 612 and 631 are duplicate. You could go into this expense reports and you can see like, what the duplications are within this expense report. It does show you the name of the personnel, kind of like who actually submitted the expense reports. You can take this further, right? So from here, it lists all the expense reports that it flagged as duplicates. So based on this, you could go and create some activities out of here. So you can create a new action. You can schedule an appointment with somebody to review this. You could kind of like keep this so that you can, you can monitor this. How do you want to kind of like remove this? Or how do you want to kind of like correct this duplication with the employee who submitted that, right? For 1 second, I'm just going to go back. I just want to show you one more thing. When you are in this audit cases, what you do need to do is like the status comes in as like an open status. So once you have started to work on this, you can change the status to in process. This will kind of like tell you that, hey, I have looked at this duplicate expense generation, like whatever this report generated, I have looked at it, so it's in process, right? Once you start to look at it, I mean, you can then go and close it or cancel it. It's just a status, but how do you close and cancel it is where you kind of like go and do some activities or put some notes or create a new action, so that all the corrective actions kind of like get addressed, within this duplication, right? Okay. So that's what, so there are like you see over here, like when we open this kind of like case ID is 00095, we saw that there were like the numbers 630, 612 and 631, right? Now, if you were to go to like another duplicate expenses which happened previously, it's going to show you a completely different 681, 682. So it's not that because it's run that it's there. Once the audit policy has run, it's going to create number of lines. So this is where the cadence comes into play. Like how often do we want to go and take a look at this? We don't want anything to remain in status opened over here. We definitely want to track it to resolution. So we want to make sure, like, if we have set up like this to run weekly, that we are monitoring this and and taking action weekly. I would say that the best practice probably would be like since the expense report creates like a payment kind of like or a invoice on the vendor that can be paid, which is like employee as a vendor, before you make the payment to the employee vendor. You should definitely review this so that you have all the duplications have been caught up front, right? Okay. So that's basically about like the duplication of expenses. Now we can also go and review the same way or random sample of expenses. This is just a random sample. We said that if there were 20 expense reports, show me like 2 of them. So here, because we ran this during this time period, probably there was 10, so it probably gave us 1 random 656, which is the expense report number. Right? It just picks up random expense report. You can go and see like when, what happened, what the transaction date was, what the details of the, of those transactions were, and kind of like go from there. Now, again, the same process as what we did for like the duplicate expenses. It's open. I would go and change the status, on this case. And then I would make it mark in progress. That means we are working on this or we have reviewed this. This is easy more or less because what we do is we are analyzing, like we are reviewing some random expenses at a time. You could also put like dollar limits and say that flag me expenses that are over $1,000, and then give me a random sample of those, which is 100%, right? So anything that's over $1,000, 100%, that's what would kind of like get reported over here. That's what basically, is the combination or intersection between the expense management module, where you actually go and say that my hotel policy is, anything over $250 require receipts. If there are no receipts, a justification is required. Meals and meals are allowed per diem. The per diem breakup is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner specified. Any of those stuff, it enforces those. So if it goes over that, it tells you that you cannot submit an expense report, or you can submit with some justification, or it's going to tell you that it requires some VP approval. However those policies are set up. This is auditing all the expense reports they are created. One thing that I do want to bring out is like the Audit Workbench works instantly. So it does not necessarily mean that when the expense reports have been posted, when the expense reports are created, it actually looks at the created date and time. So when before even they are posted, as long as they have been approved, when the expense reports have been created and approved, the Audit Workbench is going to run. It's going to look at all the expense reports that have been approved by that time, created and approved. The Audit Workbench is going to start working based on all the audit policy rules and setups that have been done. Now, we know, just like expense management, we set up all our expense categories, policies, all that stuff. It's the same setup that's also required on our Audit Workbench. We have to set up the audit policy. We have to set up the policy rule. That's when we will be able to kind of like go and make this entire thing work together. But I mean, once it is set up, it's definitely a big kind of like assurance for both compliance, internal reporting, also kind of like making sure that we are auditing kind of like our setups of workflows and all other required setups that are needed, right? So that's basically all it's advanced expense reporting. You could set up like multiple policies, multiple rules. Like you see, I set up like 2 of them. One to audit duplicate expenses, one to audit random sample of expenses. You could set up like multiple other policies and cases that you want to run and review. But it's definitely a great add-on with like the enforcement of expense policies. It's also giving you like how the audits happen and how you audited, so internally how we are complying with our audit policies, so Hope you like this presentation and enjoy. For anything, any questions, any suggestions, any details, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much.